All right, I think we are live. I love saying that. And I'm like a YouTube sensation, I think, Arctiq, with these backstage passes. So, yeah, let's getting a few people in here. I'll fill some time, I guess, before we totally get started. But this is our third Backstage Pass event focused on Anthos. So we keep moving up the stack, obviously. And we've started kind of at the bottom, going to the top. I think that's a song. It's back when I was in high school or something like that. But so the idea is we started kind of at the lower Kubernetes cluster layer. We moved into kind of developer experience. We've kind of tucked in Istio's story along the way a few times, and we're going to do that again today. But today's event is focused on application onboarding onto Anthos and GKE and leveraging some of the awesome tools we have in Migrate for Anthos. So we're going to do a couple demos on that front. And we've got some esteemed colleagues here of mine that are joining, a couple of newbies, and we got Jenn, who's a wily veteran at this point. I think it's her second in a row, so it should be a no-brainer. So as all of our backstage passes, I will give you a few slides. I'm your host, Kyle, and I will walk through a couple slides. We don't kill people with PowerPoint here. We're mostly going to do demos. The chat is open and available for people who want to kind of ask questions. And if someone of your colleagues, or if you have to bail early, we're going to do a repost of this. We'll share it out also after with the demos and stuff like that. So. We also have a special guest joining us near the end, where we'll have a quick chat with him and have kind of a fireside chat style discussion, and we'll go from there. So maybe I'll let me share my screen here. I'll share Jenn's screen actually, and we will get into things. So again, thanks for joining, everyone. This event is going to be focused on application migration, and we're going to talk about some security operations with Anthos, and we're going to give you some live demos. That's the plan. I'll tee up Anthos a little bit for those that aren't too familiar with it, but I won't go too far into it at this point. We'll get into the demos. So like I said, I am lucky to be able to host these. So I'm Kyle Bassett. Here's kind of our agenda. We'll do a quick round of intros. We're going to get into the technical presentations and demos. Like I said, we are watching the chat window. So if you have questions, please shoot them in there and we'll try to get them answered. We got a special guest coming and we will do a wrap up. And it wouldn't be right if I didn't say like and subscribe our YouTube channel for more events and demos that we post on here. So let's get into things. So Anthos, as I said, we started kind of at the bottom. We're making our way to the top. We started at the Kubernetes level. This round, we're really focused on Anthos Service Mesh. I know Jenn's going to talk a little bit about config management, like always. I think it's a real foundational part of Anthos that we always use. And then we're going to get into Anthos Migrate and what we can do to onboard apps onto some of these great things that we've been building and showing off. So quick recap, we're moving our way from the top. So, we talked about developer experience and Cloud Run and some of those aspects in the last one. And now what we're going to do is we've got our clusters built. We've got things online. Now it's time for us to jump in and start to talk about getting apps onboarded. So, having clusters are great, but without applications, there's not much of a business case there for all of us. We've got to get the apps onboarded. Components of Anthos, if we really look at these, left is something we always implement as Anthos config management. GKE is obviously part of the mix. Service Mesh has a ton of capabilities. And with all things, we'll have to bring some day two ops to the table and monitoring, logging, all that kind of stuff. So if you missed the last few sessions, they're posted on our YouTube channel. The demos are there. You can go into lots of detail in those areas and learn a little bit. So let's talk about the big migration opportunity. So fairly new technology is allowing us to take virtual machines and move them into containers. So this Migrate for Anthos toolkit has been a real game changer for us, having to lift and shift these apps manually, build Docker files, go reverse engineer everything. Some of these apps are pretty old in some of these customer environments, and there's reasons to kind of pick them up and just move them. Some of the other reasons would be, pick them up, move them, but then modernize once you get the cloud. And then I think one of the other big areas we focus on is just building a brand new modern Kubernetes-based pipeline. but there's kind of different use cases for all of this, and we're going to talk about some of those use cases today. But more enterprises are getting pressure to move to cloud. Expanding of container technologies is super popular right now. There's great business cases to do it. There's just kind of an eye chart slide to give you some of the value prop on what's doing this. We're not going to jump into this too much today, but Google also has Migrate for Compute Engine, and that's more of your lift and shift. Take a virtual machine, move it into GCP. As is, and just run it as a virtual machine. So this is kind of one wave on the migration that you can take, one option. And then our special guest will have a few things to say about this. He's got a long history with kind of bringing this to market and creating a company around it. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but we're going to really focus on the containerized play in today's session. So if you look at kind of the workflow here, it's, if we look at how do these things happen, what options do we have? Obviously, it takes some discovery and planning. We build some tooling, and then you've got the migration factory option for Migrate for Compute. And then you can either just leave it running there or kind of optimize it and move it into containers. And then we've got this other avenue where we can take virtual machines and move them into GKE, get them running in there, and then we can either keep them in place, or we can continue to modernize them, build a pipeline, those type of things. And we'll talk about that today and show you some of these options. How to get into it. So I think you skipped a slide there, Jen. Go back one. Perfect. So why containerize? I think, a lot of this is about efficiency and reducing cost. I don't think everything needs to be jammed into Kubernetes as a container, but there's certainly lots of opportunity. Density is obviously going to be a big one. We can save a lot of memory. We can take a different approach to deploying our apps. Security is a big one that you're going to get benefit from, and Jen's going to talk a little bit about that today. It forces us to automate everything we're doing in cloud. We take an infrastructure approach to all of this. So it's something that really pushes the envelope as far as like forcing us to automate. App management is going to allow us to focus on the apps and get more control of these things. So even things like network policy, access control, it moves us to CI/CD pipelines, and it makes day two operations a little bit easier. So there is no magic button, but the tooling we're going to show you today makes things a lot easier and can kind of accelerate this journey once you've got the foundational tools in place. So why migrate for Anthos? I think this is one of my last slides. A lot of it is moving these brownfield apps. They're running in a data center, and we have customers that have thousands of these apps, and they want to migrate them to cloud. And they want to decide whether they leave it in a virtual machine, move it into a serverless platform, move it into Kubernetes, these type of things. A lot of third-party apps that you don't have access to their source code. So running on older operating systems, you got to be able to pick these things up. Patching maintenance is it's an exercise that costs us a lot of time and effort when we could be doing cooler things with our time and working on cooler technologies. And then I would say the business challenges we're addressing is like, let's accelerate modernization, let's get more apps into cloud, let's accelerate everything we're trying to do, and let's reduce our maintenance and things like that, as I mentioned. So Service Mesh is going to be one of the topics Jen dives into today. So Service Mesh is this platform that gives you a lot of observability, and we get a lot of benefits just by turning it on. So we'll talk a little bit about sidecar injection, things like that, and how we can get telemetry. There's a movement to be able to put Service Meshes into VM workloads, so where we have virtual machines interacting with Kubernetes environments. We're doing quite a bit in the work in that area and trying to get the community caught up and get different operating systems supported, things like that. So look out for more in that space. We'll continue to kind of push the envelope in there. And then I mentioned, this is a language independent kind of add-on. So there's not a lot of integration we need to do at the application level. There's certainly some for different features. But just by turning on a mesh and being able to benefit from a lot of the things that come with Istio, you're going to see a lot of different functionality come into play. And, I have this joke that 3 people walk into a bar to talk about Istio, and they've all arrived to talk about something different. So you can see on the left, there's a lot of different features from telemetry, visibility, monitoring, but you also have things like lots of security, and then you can start to do fault injection, traffic shaping, things like that, retries, timeouts. So Istio is a big stack, but Google's worked hard to put it into Anthos Service Mesh and to be able to extend a lot of these capabilities, and make your life easier and be able to adopt these new techs. So let's get into the fun part. I will stop talking for a while. So we've got a great team here to be able to talk about the demo and give you a quick insight into this. So we're kicking things off with Mohsin. He's going to talk about Migrate for Anthos on Linux workloads. So Linux workloads are by far the most widely supported, piece of tech in this. So we can pick up a Linux workload and move it to cloud. All kinds of benefits, like you think of the amount of Java apps that are running on Linux, the amount of WebSphere, WebLogic that's out there today, all your expensive licensing costs. There's a real opportunity for us to consolidate these and treat the applications a little bit differently. Chris is going to dive into Migrate for Anthos for Windows workloads. So yeah, Windows is exciting. My team gets super excited about Windows. A little bit of a pun there, but the reality is Windows is everywhere, and it's a huge opportunity for customers to consolidate and start to move to cloud. So we are not, we like working on the fun and exciting stuff, and this stuff is, in my mind, pretty fun and exciting. But it is Windows. I mean, come on, we're all Linux people here, right? So we're gonna give a demo on that and talk about some of the business opportunities. And then Jenn is going to finish things up with Anthos Service Mesh for security. So I don't think we've dove into much on the security around the Anthos Service Mesh. And she's going to jump on that. And we are going to hope that the demo gods and the cottage internet that I'm on right now holds up for this event. So I think without further ado, I think it's time to get into this thing. I don't think I have any more slides, Jenn. Jenn is running my slides to save my slow upload. So I'm going to hand things over to Mohsin to jump in, lead with a few slides, and then he's got a demo for us. Let me put up Mohsin's screen. Mohsin, do you want to run your slides?
Yeah.
Or you want? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. First, run my slides. I think.
Do you want Jenn to run them, or are you going to run your slides?
Jenn, if you can run it. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Just give us a little head nod when you want us to switch slides again.
Sure.
There we go. All right. Over to you, Mohsin.
All right,
Take it away.
Yeah, thanks. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about migrating and modernizing Linux workloads with Migrate for Anthos. So next slide, please. So a little bit about myself. My name is Mohsin Raza. I work as a consultant for Arctiq, and my focus areas are networking, automation, mostly using Ansible or Terraform, and managing cloud infrastructure. So next slide, please. Yeah. So Migrate for Anthos is a tool that helps you extract your legacy workloads from your virtual machines and automatically containerize them and run them on GKE. So Migrate for Anthos minimizes the manual effort required to move and convert existing applications into containers on Google Kubernetes engine. So, most digital transformations will be a mix of strategies. So for the workloads that will benefit from containers, Migrate for Anthos delivers a fast, smooth path to modernization. And it does not require rewriting your application. And that's really a key point. So when you're done, you have your workloads running in containers, and you can leave the management of the infrastructure, of the underlying infrastructure, to Google. So next slide, please. So what are the challenges in modernizing these containers? So we see a lot of customers want to modernize, but it's not easy, and large enterprises have a lot of unique challenges. We have a lot of customers that have hundreds of applications. In many cases, they have thousands of applications that were written over the last 10 to 15 years using legacy frameworks, running on legacy operating systems. So what do you do with these? It's not really practical to rewrite all of them, make them more cloud native, use a microservices architecture. So what do you do? Now, the good news here is you don't actually have to rewrite all of them. And even though your application is not using a microservices architecture, you can still convert them to using containers and get a lot of same benefits. So this is where Migrate for Anthos comes in. Migrate for Anthos helps you extract your legacy workloads from your virtual machines and automatically containerize them and run them on GKE. The tool is fast, it's easy to use, and it does not require rewriting your app. So next slide. So let's see how it works. So let's now dive a little bit deeper into the solution and see how it works. And at high level, there are three main steps. The first step is to identify good fit workloads. So I'll talk about what good fit means in a couple of slides. Your source virtual machines can be on-prem, on GCP, or on other clouds. The operating system can be any of the major Linux distributions. The next step is to migrate using Migrate for Anthos. The entire migration can be orchestrated directly from GKE. Will automatically containerize your virtual machine workloads. It will generate CI/CD artifacts, which includes container image, Docker file, and sample YAMLs, and will move your entire workload, including your code, your data, and your state. So everything moves over to a container. And finally,
Hey Mohsin, I noticed you mentioned other clouds there. So what are the other clouds we can pull from to pull stuff into GKE?
Yeah, Migrate for Anthos supports Microsoft Azure and currently and the VMware for on-prem, and it also supports AWS.
Thanks.
Yeah. So the last step is to operate and optimize. So here you want to make sure that you have set up your networking rules, firewall rules, access control quotas, and alerting, and so on. And then you can enjoy the benefits of managed infrastructure, including increased utilization, elimination of OS management, integrated logging and monitoring, and of course, the entire stack is supported and managed by Google. So next slide. So let's dive into the second step, the migrate step, a little bit more to see how Migrate for Anthos can transform the workload. So for setup, first you have to configure a processing cluster. Migration will be done on this cluster before deploying to production. Then you will configure the migration source, which can be either VMware for on-prem, AWS, or Microsoft Azure, GCE, a virtual machine, or Migrate for Anthos version 1.0, which was the older version. So some of the remote resources depends on Migrate for Compute Engine setup. So Migrate for Compute Engine components coordinate with your source platform, including to facilitate storage streaming from your source virtual machines. Then to migrate the workload, first you will use mixctl tool to generate a migration plan. The migration plan is implemented as a Kubernetes custom resource definition and is contained along with additional resources such as a Kubernetes persistent volume claim in the migration plan file. Then you will generate the deployment artifacts, which in the case of Linux workload includes a container image, Docker file, reference deployment YAMLs, and a data volume for stateful workloads. Then you can test and verify the extracted container image and data volume function correctly when executed in a container. We may run a sanity test on the processing cluster, identify any issues or edits needed to the migration plan. So when a stateful workload is being migrated and the workload continues to accumulate new data in state while running at the source, you may want to iterate through one or more data sync cycles before performing a final data sync with the source shutdown. This will allow reducing the final cutover downtime. Each data sync execution will only transfer the change data since the last data sync cycle. So with the container artifacts now ready and validated, you can continue with deployment in a test, staging, or production cluster. Alternatively, you can use the artifacts to integrate with a build and deploy pipeline using an orchestration tool such as Google Cloud Build. So next slide, please. So zooming back out, a question that we get a lot from our customer is, what is a good fit workload? What are sweet spot for Linux workloads? So the solution is very generic. It works really well for a lot of workloads. So common workloads with an enterprise like multi-tier LAMP stacks or Java applications, those are really good fits. If you have a low duty cycle and bursty workloads, those also work really well, because once you put them in a container, then it's easy to oversubscribe them, and you can very quickly scale up and scale down. And most of the Linux distributions are supported, including their old and new versions. So what's not a good candidate workload? So you want to make sure that the workload will run well within Kubernetes. And so that means if you have a high performance or high memory databases, that may not be a good fit. If you have a spatial kernel or hardware needs, like if you need a spatial kernel module, that also may not run with Kubernetes. And finally, you want to make sure that your licenses, your software licenses allow you to run within containers. So if you have licenses that are tied to hardware ID registration, that also may not be a good fit. And in some of the cases, you may instead want to use Migrate for Compute Engine and move your virtual machine from your original cloud, original source data center into GCP. Next slide, please. So before diving into the live demo, I would like to quickly go through a high-level diagram showing different components involved in Migrate for Anthos. Firstly, you will need some sort of IP connectivity between your source cloud platform and Google Cloud. You can either use Cloud VPN for secure communication or Cloud Interconnect. Migrate for Anthos depends on Migrate for Compute Engine. Therefore, as a prerequisite, you have to set up Migrate for Compute Engine as well on the Google Cloud platform. You have to deploy Migrate for Compute Engine Manager, which is available through Google Marketplace. Then using the web interface of the Migrate for Compute Engine Manager, you can create credentials for the source cloud platform in use and then define your source cloud, which can be either VMware, Azure, or AWS. For this demo, I will use Azure as source cloud platform. Then again, using Migrate for Compute Engine Manager, you create a cloud extension, which is sort of a channel for virtual machine storage between two cloud platforms, like in case of this demo, Azure and GCP. A cloud extension uses dual node active-passive configuration for high availability, whereby each node serves its own workloads while providing backup for the other. So if you have VMware as a source cloud platform, then you will install Migrate for Compute Engine backend and Migrate for Compute Engine vCenter plugin as well. In the case of public cloud platforms like AWS and Azure, there's no need for any components to be installed in these environments. So let's dive into the live demo now.
Hey, Mohsin, there's a question here on the
Sure.
chat. So Michael Davis is asking, how are packages removed during the migration, like Chef and Sumo Logic agents? We don't need them in the container. So it might be worth, there's lots of data files in Linux that we don't need. We don't want to migrate those. You want to talk a little bit about just the strategy of how you deal with that before we do the demo?
It is recommended to first optimize your virtual machine which you want to migrate. So like disable any unnecessary services on the virtual machine, or but when you generate the migration plan, which I will show you now in the live demo, so you also have options to exclude some of the locations if you want to. So you can exclude them from there as well.
All right, I'll put your screen up here. I think what you were showing there is much of this, like I said earlier, is about developing this factory of, use case driven demo of migrations. And then, you come up with an approach, you nail the configuration, you train your teams, and then you can start rolling these things out in rapid fashion. Maybe just Control ++ on your screen there for us with the little bit older eyes. I mean, my eyes are fine. It's mostly for everyone who's watching here. Okay. That looks good.
Yeah. So I have this virtual machine on Microsoft Azure, and I'm running a very simple web-based application because I have limited time for this demo. So I'm just using a simple web app, which is hosted on this virtual machine. And we have a public IP assigned to this virtual machine, and we can access the app using this IP. The app is accessible on port 8080. It's a simple Jiffy based app which is generating just failed Jiffies. So I'll try to migrate this virtual machine in this demo to GKE, and I will containerize my app during that process. So on the Google Cloud Platform side, I have 2 processing clusters already configured. Actually, I'm using 2 clusters because I need to show all the steps involved in the migration. So some like the actual migration takes around, for this kind of a workload, it will take around 15 minutes. So which is kind of too much time for such a demo. So what I've done is I've used another cluster, and I've completed some of the steps on that cluster. So that's why I'm using 2 clusters. Otherwise, you just need one.
Can you zoom in a little bit on that one too, Mohsin,
sure.
just so people can see? Yeah, and we have some other demos posted if people want to see the entire flow of it to go through. Walk you through it here. This is the cooking show where we have 2 ovens. One of the the turkey's already kind of been in there for a little while.
Yeah, exactly. So if you go to the workloads, you can see I have just the Migrate for Anthos components are installed on the processing cluster only, and there's nothing on the other cluster. So we can filter the other cluster. So the UI is also pretty nice. You can filter based on the different values. So, and in the services as well, I have just the Migrate for Anthos components installed. So, so here you can see the Migrate for Compute Engine Manager interface. Here we have to, as I said, it's a prerequisite for Migrate for Anthos. So you have to install Migrate for Compute Engine Manager, and you can install it very simply through Google Marketplace. Once it is installed, you can access it through its IP, and then you have to define the source cloud platform. So we have defined the credentials for our source cloud, which is Azure. So you will provide the service principal details here, and then in the cloud details you will define an object for your source cloud. And besides that, you have to define a cloud extension as well for virtual machine storage streaming purposes. So I have already defined this as well. So let's dive into the demo. So first, let me shut down the virtual machine so that I can migrate it.
Yeah, and as you'll see, the web UI, Google continues to put all the Anthos toolkits into the GCP console. I think you'll see some more integration coming soon in that sense that you can use the same GCP console for some of these migrations. So keep an eye out for that. I'm sure Arctiq posts a blog when some of that stuff's available.
Yeah. So I'll do all the migration steps from the Cloud Shell. So let's first get the credentials to our processing cluster 2, which I will use to show you the whole steps of setting up the Migrate for Anthos. So I have the credentials to access my cluster, and now I can run the kubectl commands. So let's try to get the nodes information first. It has 3 nodes, and now I can start with the deployment of Migrate for Anthos on the processing cluster. So the first command you will need to run is mixctl setup install in order to install different components for Migrate for Anthos. So mixctl setup is a tool which you can use to manage all the migration. So basically, we are doing the mixctl setup install. The setup install will create the namespaces required by Migrate for Anthos, storage classes, RBAC roles, things like that. So once the mixctl setup tool is finished, you can validate your installation by running the mixctl doctor command. So we can see the validation checks are still in progress. So after some time, it will finish. So we can run the mixctl doctor command again to verify that.
For all you Googlers that are on here, it can also be migcuddle is acceptable.
Migcuddle, yeah. I call it mixctl, yeah, but same thing like kubectl, kubectl. So the deployment has finished, and we can see the deployment is done. And now the next step is to define the source cloud platform. So we will add a source. So as we are using Microsoft Azure as source, so we will add that. So this is the command to create the source. Here I'm creating a source, and I'm saying the source type is Azure. It can be AWS as well. And this is the name of the source that I have given it, that I'm using. And then we are giving it the cloud details object name. This is the cloud detail object name that we have defined in the Migrate for Compute Engine Manager. And this is the IP of the Migrate for Compute Engine Manager, and this is the cloud extension name. So So it's now asking us the password for the Migrate for Compute Engine Manager API, and we can provide the password. So the source is now successfully created. We can verify that by issuing the mixctl source list command, so we can see the source is created. We can also verify using kubectl get storage class command. So this command will show you the same name as the source we have created. So it will basically create a same storage class with the same name. So the next step is to create the migration plan. So we'll generate the migration plan for this migration. So so basically we are this is for this command we are creating a migration with the name Gphy. We have named this Gphy app-demo, and the source is the source that we created in the earlier step, and we are providing the virtual machine ID of our virtual machine. So this is the virtual machine ID from the Microsoft Azure virtual machine, and we are setting intent to image. Intent can be, we are setting intent to image because our workload is basically a stateless workload. So we just want to generate the container image from the virtual machine. If you have a stateful workload where you need to generate the container image as well as you want to extract the data from the container, so you need to set intent to image and data. So right now I'm using stateless workload, so I'll do this. So you can see it has generated a migration plan, which is we can see the migration plan here. Not sure if I can zoom it. Okay, so the migration plan is basically in the form of a Kubernetes custom resource definition, and we can go through the plan and we can make changes to it. So let's see. So for example, we can change the namespace where we want to install our app. So let's change it to Gphy app. We'll install our app in this namespace. And besides that, if like, for example, here, the intent is set to image, and it can be, the intent can be image and it can be image and data. If you are using stateful workloads, it can be data only if you just want to export the data from the source virtual machine. So you can set the intent here, and you can see the storage class name is set here, the VM ID, and this is the important parameter, run mode. So run mode here, you can see that it is set to test clone. There are two run modes basically supported. One is normal, and you can set it to test clone. In the normal mode, the virtual machine is shut down before the migration starts. So basically, the virtual machine is shut down, and then an image is extracted from it, and then that image is used to migrate it to the GKE. In the test clone mode, basically the virtual machine keeps on running while it's being migrated to GKE. So, but for Microsoft Azure currently, test clone version, like test clone mode doesn't support the virtual machine to keep on running. So that's the reason I shut it down. But for VMware, you can use a test clone version. You can keep your VM keep on running in the VMware, and you can still migrate it. So it's kind of a live migration. So
cool.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be a Arctiq backstage event if we didn't show you some YAML.
Yeah. So as there was a question that Kyle told me, it was related to how we can remove some of the components from the virtual machine. So maybe this will fulfill that request. So you can exclude some of the locations from the virtual machine if you don't want to be included in your container image, then you can mention them here and exclude them. So, and there's the image names that will, the container images that will be generated, and they will be uploaded to GCR. So these will be the container image names. They'll Migrate for Anthos generates two images. One is a non-runnable image, base image, and a runnable container image. So non-runnable base image is used if you want to make change in future. If you want to make changes to the image, then you can use this image. And the runnable container image you can use, and you can use this image to deploy to another cluster. So these are the options, and then there's a bucket name because the artifacts generated by Migrate for Anthos are stored in Google Storage bucket. So this will be the bucket name on the Google Storage, and this will be the path prefix, and this will be the app name. So this is the migration plan that we are going to use, and we have already modified it. So I have saved it, and now I'm going to use this plan and start my migration. So first, as I'm using a different namespace for my application, so I will first create a namespace in the processing cluster. So I will create the namespace Jiffy app that I've used in my migration plan, and then I will start the migration. So we can start the migration by generating the artifacts. So the command is mixctl migration generate artifacts, and we'll provide the migration object name. So this will start the migration. It's doing the validation checks first.
Oh, I think Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer just got an Nagios alert that someone's moving a virtual machine off of Azure.
Yeah. Yeah, so mixctl migration status. We can check the status of the migration by showing mixctl migration status command and provide the name of the migration and the namespace. So we can see that it's running. So this will take around like what I have during my previous runs, I've figured out it will take around 15 minutes. So that's the reason I have already done this step on another cluster so that we can save some time. You can also check a more verbose output using the -v flag. So we can see the logs, the container logs and stuff. So we can keep this running, and we can move on to the next cluster where I already have the migration done. So these steps are already done. I will proceed with the other cluster now. So let's get the credentials of the other cluster first. So I have the credentials, and now I can run the kubectl commands on this cluster. So you can see there are no pods in the default namespace, and we have these namespaces in this cluster. Jiffy app namespace is already created in this cluster. And in the Jiffy app namespace, we don't have any pods, just to make sure we don't have anything in the cluster. So now I can start with the migration. We will deploy the migrated workload to the processing cluster. So in order to do that, we have to first download the artifacts that are already generated. So we will issue the command mixctl migration get artifacts and the object name and the namespace. So this command will download the artifacts from the Google storage. And I'm storing these artifacts in this directory. So you can see it is downloading the artifacts, and it has downloaded the 3 artifacts, which the first one is the deployment specification. This is an auto-generated sample manifest for the deployment of your application. You can use this manifest to deploy your app on the Kubernetes cluster. So which is a very cool thing. You don't have to write the manifest, the whole manifest by yourself. So it's auto-generated, and you can just modify it as per your requirements. The second artifact is the Docker file. So you have the Docker file. You can use this Docker file to spin up a container and test everything, like some sort of sanity test to check everything is working. And there's a copy of the migration plan. So we can go through the deployment specification. We can see it's creating a deployment, and this is the name of the deployment, and it's using 1 replica. Let's change it to 3 so that 3 replicas are created inside this deployment. And you can see that it's using the container image that is generated by the first step, the previous step of migration. from the GCR. So this will be the container image, and it is also creating a headless service, which is of type cluster IP. But there's no service which is exposing our application outside the cluster. So we need to add a definition for a service so that it is exposed and we can access our application through the public IP. So we will add a service here which will be of type load balancer, and I have named this service as Jiffy app service. I'm using the same app name for selector as it is in with the previous service. So, and I'm using protocol TCP, and I'm using port 8080, and the target port is 8080 because I will access the application on this port. So let's save these changes, and now our deployment specification is ready, and we can use this deployment specification and we can deploy it to our cluster. Before doing that, you can also run mixetl migration cleanup command. What this will do is it basically removes any references to PVs or PVCs. But as we are using a stateless application, so there's no PVs or PVCs generated. But in case of stateful workloads, there will be PVs and PVCs, so you can run this command to remove any references. So after that, we can now move on to the next step, which is using the deployment specification which we just modified, and then we will deploy it to our processing cluster in the Jiffy app namespace. So I have deployed the application, so now I can go to the processing cluster, and if I go to workloads, I will see here that the Jiffy app is creating. It will take a little bit time. Let's refresh it, and it will become active. Well, so pods will be getting ready. So, okay, so you can see the deployment, the workload is now ready. And if we go to the services and ingress, we can see, so the app is creating, and we can refresh it. So we have the IP, so we can access the our service on this app. So you can see the app is now available, and it's running fine inside the Kubernetes. Oops. Okay. So
nice.
Yeah. So
that's great. Nice, lots of detail there. Obviously, when we do these migrations for customers, we kind of turn this into a factory and make it, but we wanted to show you what's required underneath the covers, obviously, to kind of get into it.
Exactly. So so now our application is migrated. But what if you want to update anything, like you want to update any package, or you want to add any security updates or make any changes in the embedded configuration? So you can do that, as you know already. We already have the Docker file with us, so we can make the changes in the Docker file, and we can generate a new image. So let's say we add a package to our container. So let's add a package like apt-get install. Let's add htop. So we have made a change in the Docker file, and I will use this Docker file to generate the new container image. So I'll use gcloud build to generate the new container image, and I'll tag it as 1.0.1 because the previous container image is 1.0.0. So let's do that.
Okay, so this is a nice way to, when you migrate, you can still provide updates to your containers and still work and interact with them if they need changes and new packages, things like that. Cool.
Yeah. So this will take a little bit time to finish.
All right, Mohsin, maybe we should throw it over to Chris here just so we can get through all the demos. Anything else you wanted to add? Just some color around any other points you wanted to put across?
Yeah, I'm pretty much finished with this was the last step, so I'm pretty much done. I hope this demo will have given us some good overview about the Migrate for Anthos, so it might be helpful. Thanks
Nice.
for your time. Yeah.
Cool. All right. We just moved the random Giphy generator from Azure to GCP. So cool. All right. So I guess, Chris, you're up next, right? We've got everyone
Awesome.
waiting for this Windows demo and Windows discussion. So I'm sure everyone's pretty jacked to see this. So I'll share your screen there. Cool.
Absolutely.
All right. Let's keep ripping through this. Good job. Wow, man.
Yeah, thanks, Mohsin. Thanks for doing all the overview for me, so I don't have to do all that long and hard stuff. But I just wanted to start this off with, I guess, my own little pun. Before we got on this talk, Jenn was talking about how we rarely get to see each other anymore. It's been a while, and I guess you could say these backstage events are a window or windows of our opportunities for us to sort of get to see each other more often. But anyways, without further ado, this is.
Fun. I'll add that to the dad jokes Slack.
Absolutely. Yeah, so for Migrate for Anthos, there is a roadmap for Windows migrations. So for those of you that don't know me, I've done a few live events before. I was on last week with the Arctiq Ansible meetup, if you've been on that. But if not, this is me. I'm part of the Arctiq team as well, and I'm going to show you a little bit about Windows container migrations. So basically, we've been using Windows servers for a while now, whether we want to or not. And a lot of customers don't really want to be, relying on their legacy hardware that is running maybe Windows Server 2008 or older. And so a lot of customers nowadays are looking to modernize and get into Kubernetes, or at least containerize their applications so that it's not running on, those Windows servers that might be toppling over any time now. There's also the concerns for licensing, like how do we deal with Windows licenses, and are we going to have to pay for licenses per node and things like that? And so moving into using Windows nodes on GKE or Anthos GKE clusters, you don't have to really worry about that. It's all built into the price of our machines and our clusters, and it's all calculated for you, right? So the idea here is we can sort of support IIS 7 and newer servers that are running ASP.NET using the 3.5 framework or newer. There's a few others like WebLogic, and you got to just make sure you're using Windows Server 2008 R2 or newer. Anything older than that is not going to be officially supported. Now, this is not released yet. Windows Server migrations are coming very soon. We expect to see a beta or alpha release available to the public or so sometime in mid-July. So take a look and keep a lookout for that. And just keep in mind, like what Mohsin said, there is the Migrate for Compute Engine part, which if you just want to get into the cloud and you're not there yet, you can use Migrate for Compute Engine to get into GKE, or rather not GKE, but GCP, and use Compute Engine there, and take advantage of things like TPUs and GPUs and bring your own licensing. For containerized workloads, for Migrate for Anthos, it gets a little bit more complex. So you have to define a plan, which the migrate CTL command will do for you. It creates a plan and identifies what artifacts it needs to extract from your Windows servers, and then generates the Docker files and generates the artifacts so that you can build the image and then upload it to your cluster. All right. So I'll get straight into my demo here. And I'm doing my demo completely via a recording, and I apologize if that feels a little bit, sorry if my gain is too high. Hopefully that's a bit better, Kyle. Yeah, so I'm doing this on video. Hopefully that doesn't make me look bad, but this is a very long one because I'm trying to do some building and deploying with Windows apps, and you can tell that Windows apps are a little bit bigger than Linux ones generally. So in here, I've got a Windows processing cluster, and this cluster is going to be used to basically perform the migration, to scan our VMs and take out the stuff from our VMs and move them into a container, or rather all the artifacts into our GCP bucket, and then they would use that to build our container. So in here, in my processing cluster, it's just running Kubernetes 1.17 or GKE 117. This is the latest version in the, I guess, the bleeding edge release channel. And you'll see that I've also got a Windows pool instead of just the default Linux one. So in this case, I can be able to actually run Windows workloads inside that pool. The reason why I'm using the latest version of Kubernetes, the 1.17, is because with the Windows migration piece really requires 1.16 or newer. And the actual VM that I'm using to build the image is going to be mapped to this sort of version. So for example, I'm using 117 here. You'll look at my 2 VMs in Compute Engine. And my 2 VMs here, I've got an Orchard CMS Windows VM, and I've got a Windows 1909 containers VM. So the Orchard CMS, I'll talk about this one a little bit. This guy is basically just the VM, the source VM that I'm trying to pull from. This one's going to have the Orchard CMS, which is just a content management system that is an alternative to, I would say, WordPress, right? It's an open source one that runs on ASP.NET. And in here, I'm running it on Windows Server 2012 R2. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's 2012 R2. It's a bit old. And because it's 2012 R2, I'm not going to have the right modules for, I guess, the actual build process, the Docker file to build it and to run that in our relatively new 1.17 GKE cluster. So I've got another VM here. This is a Windows Server for Containers VM. This one's just got a CMD and PowerShell, and that's running on the latest version of Windows Server, or relatively new one anyway. And this one I can build the contents using my generated artifacts and the Docker file that's created. So you'll see the mapping here. Google's got the references for that for you. So if you want to do Windows migrations, just make sure if you're using 117 GKE, then that you're using the SAC version 119 or 1909. And then there's also the long-term support version if you want to incorporate that. So really, that's just depending on whether you want long-term support or if you're okay with updating your clusters and your node versions every 18 months or so. So in here, I'm going to take a look at what my Orchard CMS VM looks like. So in here, I've got Windows Server Managers coming up, and I'll just open up IIS. And in here, I'm just replacing the default IIS page, the website, with Orchard CMS. And that looks a little bit like this. So I'm going to run that in Internet Explorer. I've
a bit of a flashback for a lot of people right there. Looking at the screens.
Absolutely, yeah. And I had to deal with Internet Explorer, and I had to manually enable downloading of files, which was a little bit new to me. But I guess I appreciate the security of that.
Being protected by not being able to do anything. So
exactly. And so in here, I'm just loading up Orchard CMS. So it's kind of like WordPress, if that's something you're familiar with. And I've put in a little bit of an entry here I'm going to show you that is I put in myself. It's a little poem. And I'll just show you that it's actually stateful, and it's remaining in there after we do the migration. So I'm going to shut this guy down because with Windows migrations right now, you have to have the VMs shut down first before you can perform the migration. Once I do that, I'm going to basically go into the Cloud Shell. So I've got my GKE cluster that's running the Windows nodes. And in here, I'm just making sure I'm selecting that guy. Yep. So it's a Windows processing cluster. And right now I have to do everything from the Cloud Shell as opposed to the Cloud SDK, mainly because the Migrate CTL command is not available to download to be used offline. So some of the Windows dependencies are available in Cloud Shell, which is what I'm going to use right now. And so in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this Python command. And this guy here, this is going to create the generated jobs or the job generation YAML manifests. So this one in particular generates the manifest for generating a job to create the plan, the migration plan, like Mohsin showed before. And then it's also going to generate the job generation manifest for generating artifacts. So lots of little nested things happening here. So as I'm doing that, it generates a snapshot of my Orchard CMS VM, the disk, and it's also going to generate the actual manifest that I need to run to create the artifacts and create the plan. So this is how I set up my Orchard CMS server, just to show you really quickly. This is, very simple, straightforward setup that's coming from GitHub, and I just had to make some ACL changes on the folder structure just to allow IIS to actually read from that particular directory. And once I did that, you saw what CMS looked like I showed you earlier. And basically, yeah, I'm going to start migrating. So let's fast forward here, because you don't want to be waiting for this entire task to happen. And we get to the end. So it creates these two tasks. And you'll see I've got two things here. I've got the job for generating migration plan and job for generating artifacts. Okay, so the first one I'm going to run is generate the migration plan. So the migration plan, what that does is basically tells or finds out what paths I need to consider when I do the migration afterwards, or the generation of artifacts. So it's searching through the VM disk and looking for paths that are not very standardized, or rather, it's not default in there in the Windows Server 2012 R2. So it's ignoring the generic stuff that's part of every Windows Server VM, and it's just looking for what's new. So it looks for and it finds my Orchard CMS IIS directory, and it copies that over, or it's going to create that plan to copy it over. So after that's done, I'm going to have the plan generated, and next I will actually run that plan and start to generate artifacts. So generate artifacts here, same idea. It's just the job run. It creates a pod, and it starts, basically it creates a pod, and a container comes up. The container is going to mount onto the cloned disk that we made, and it's going to then copy that all over into GCS, into a GCS bucket. So you're going to get the migration artifacts, you're going to get the Docker file to build with, and you're going to get the every sort of, or anything that's Microsoft dependent, like all the Windows Server versions that you need to write down, any sort of Microsoft GAC dependencies, and anything to do with Migrate, any sort of tools that it needs to implement. It's all going to go into this particular cloud storage bucket, like you see here. And so when we run that, let's just skip through this whole part really quickly. The power of video editing. You'll see here that, yeah, there's a lot of Windows commands happening. We're doing just basically a bunch of copies of Microsoft dependencies and things like that, as well as my own files for the website. And once that's all done, I'm pretty much good to start building. So here we go. So now you'll see the artifact zip in there, the migration plan, environments, and config. So the artifact zip is what's got all the contents, right? All the files that were extracted from the VM, as well as some of the tools that we need to run the build. So what I'm going to do next is jump into my Windows Server VM. This particular one is just a Windows Server for containers. It's running version 1909. And this one in particular is just, it's plain old command line, and I can use CMD or PowerShell. And I've also got it authenticated with Docker so that I can log into gcr.io. So that's already been done. I skipped that part here just so that I can run these commands really quickly. And looks like I was just trying to set up my font and it took me a while. There we go. Hopefully that's big enough for you. And I'm going to run now the PowerShell commands to set up my environment. So I'm going to skip this over, but basically you would have to enable long paths for the extracting of your artifacts. So that's just to make sure, if you have a really long path in there, it's not going to break when you try to extract it, and then you would reboot the machine. But otherwise, I've done that already, so I'm going to skip it. And the next thing you would do is log into gcloud so that you can pull from your bucket, but I've already done that. And I'm going to start pulling the bucket. So I've got that GCR bucket with artifacts.zip in there. You basically copy it over just like you would in Linux, right? You would use gsutil, copy that thing. And, and if you're not familiar with PowerShell, the gcloud commands are pretty much the same syntax as far as I've seen. So it should work one-to-one here. I copy that over. And after that's done, I could start building it and using it, right? So I extract the artifacts. And this piece in particular, let's just remove the existing one there and then start extracting it. So this is kind of the main reason why I wanted to show you the recording, because I had to sit here for a good 10 minutes or so to actually wait for this thing to extract. So the fun part about recorded demos is I can just zoom through that really quickly here.
Yeah, it's hard to find a Windows box that's not 40 gigs, I guess, these days, right?
I guess I would blame myself for choosing the smallest one-core machine type when I built this guy, but otherwise, yeah, that's my own fault. So anyways, I've authenticated into using the Docker configuration helper, and now I can start running Docker commands, and it's already authenticated with GCR. So in this case, I'm going to run docker login. It's done. And then I can do one small edit. So here's the Docker file that was created by my run. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this with some additional changes that I've made, because in this particular case, the migration didn't, completely solve everything that I needed. There were some pieces that were missing, and that were, for example, the iCals, or rather the ACL setups for all of my directories, because that right now wasn't configured, is not ready for Windows Migrate, and they're still working on that. So I'm expecting to see that fully worked out by the time they release the Windows version for Migrate for Anthos. But that's just something we have to manually do first. So I did that. I made that change, and now I'm going to build the Docker file, or build a Docker image container, or container image, yada, yada, yada. And this piece is pretty cool because you'll see a lot of layers coming up, and it's quite a long process, but it's doing a lot of the work for you. Even though it looks like I'm doing a lot of things manually here, it's really just following documentation, and once you go through it, it's pretty much there. All of your image is already there in GCR once this is all done. So I'm gonna zoom through it here a little bit. And you'll see here I'm pushing the image now to GCR.io. It's a little bit bigger than a traditional image, even though I'm just running Orchard CMS, which is just a simple IIS ASP.NET service. It just has like IIS plus the little files to make that CMS come up, but then it's got some Windows components as well, and so you'll see that by the end of this thing we end up with a container image that is a little bit larger than what we're maybe used to, and so it's a few gigabytes large, I think, or maybe in this case it wasn't. Oh yeah, this was 2.25. Yeah, so not so bad. And then all of the dependencies for Windows, particularly Windows containers, it's already included for when you're creating your traditional Windows containers here. So that's created.
I've seen 4.5 gigabyte Docker images based on Linux in the past, and I don't know if Daniel's watching, but I know he's come across a couple of those. So 2.5 is not too bad. Not too bad.
Yeah, no, that's great. That means maybe we're doing better on the Windows side. In fact, maybe this is going to run faster than a Linux container. I don't know. Somebody's got to be supporting the Windows guys on this channel, right? So
right, we got to give the Windows guys some love as well.
Absolutely. So in here, after I've created the image, it's already in GCR after I've pushed it. basically what I'm doing here is I'm creating a simple Windows deployment and service, just like you would see in the Windows or the Google documentation for creating Windows containers. And this is pretty much copy and paste on the top here from those docs, pointing it to my particular GCR.io image. And then I'm adding this service at the end here, just so that I can tell the container, or rather this deployment, to expose this particular service, so that, you know, the pod that's running on port 80, we want to expose that as a service so that we can access it from the public using a public external load balancer. So when I do that, I'm going to apply that. I'm going to do that with kubectl apply, and for some reason it didn't work the first time, but then I ran it again and it worked. So I'm just going to run it again, and you'll see that it's coming up again. So kubectl, or rather Orchard CMS, and I've got that service there. It's pending. I'll give it a few seconds. Once that's up and running, you'll see that, and here's an example of me running in PowerShell. But first things first, if I'm trying to access this guy from this pending IP, right? You're gonna notice something that I guess I made a mistake when I was configuring this migration, and I'm gonna show you how let's say I intentionally made a mistake so that I could show you this, to show you how I would fix that. So remember not to exec into your pods using bash here, because it's a Windows container, so it doesn't have bash. So I'm going to use PowerShell, and I'm going to log into it using PowerShell, just like you would, any other container. And in here, I can run PowerShell commands to basically modify anything I want inside the container. Normally you wouldn't do this, but just for the sake of demo purposes, I'm going to show you how I'm going to just move my file structure, my directory structure, to accurately display this website like I should. So in my inetpub www root, I've got my Orchard directory. I'm just going to move all the contents in there into the www root. And so there Very cool. I've got the get IIS site. It's the default site is started already. It's running on that physical path. Sort of like what you would see if you were running those PowerShell commands on just a regular Windows VM. And now when I try to access that particular service, so you'll see here I got the service, I got the public IP now, it finally gave me one. So I'm going to take that, I try to access it, and you'll see that, yeah, IIS comes up, and yeah, I made a boo-boo. I didn't want that. I want Orchard CMS. So let's go change that. I go into PowerShell again, and I'm basically going to change that doing one simple trick. I just move the directory over, and I'm going to delete the old one. So now
this is like super inception. You're on a Linux box integrating with IIS, working with PowerShell in GKE on Google Cloud. Mind-blowing stuff.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. I found it pretty interesting too. I wouldn't call myself a Windows guy, but I really appreciate the work that Google's been doing for this to make this work. And it was a lot less hassle than what I'm used to in certain Windows, I guess, troubleshooting scenarios. and so here's my Orchard CMS like before, just like the same as before. Not much has changed. And I'm just going to cobble over into my content, my little poem here that I copied over.
What about that record you created? So were you able to move the persistence of that when you did the migration?
The record?
Well, like if you had data that was in your CMS before and then your migration, would that come along?
Yeah. So as you can see here, I've got my blog entry, I guess you would say. It's a little poem that I wrote before migrating it. And it's called Moving House by Hugh Savage. And I apologize to him for spelling his name wrong. But basically, yeah, here's an example of showing you, migration to Windows, or from Windows to containers. It worked, and our state is still there. So, just nice. A quick excerpt here is, let's face it, what we like to take is nothing less than the house itself. So accustomed we've become to feel and incommunicable smell of what we've come to know as home. So stop it. Let's stop it and move to containers already, because that's what we want.
That's the first poem ever read on a Backstage Pass. Impressive. That's an awesome demo, man. I mean, I think, we joke about we don't work with Windows very often, but this is a super solid business case, for people who have these applications and need to get them to cloud really quickly and still be able to interact with them and modernize them and be able to update the applications. So this is really cool stuff. And we're super excited to be working with the Migrate for Anthos team to get this stuff to market. I know there is a mountain of use cases and projects we can do. We obviously showed you pretty deep into the weeds of how to make this stuff happen. Obviously, working with Google and Arctiq, we're going to do a lot of this work for you and automate some of these points and stuff like that. But really, really strong business cases that come out of these things and cost savings for customers. You can pretty much fund a project off some of these consolidation efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I hope everyone else on the channel did as well.
All right, cool. Well, we're going to keep going. We're running a little bit behind, but we always run behind a little bit, so more content. Good. So we're going to throw it over. Jenn, thanks a lot, Chris. That was wicked. Anything else you want to finally add there on the end?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention really quickly, like we're expecting this to be less of a manual command line based sort of encounter and more just creating all of this inside of CRDs. So expect to see that in the near future. There will be a discovery tooling that is going to help you for fit assessment to just make sure that what you have in VMs right now is going to be a good fit for migrating to containers. So you'll see that as sort of like a console integration in the Google Cloud Console, similar to what you see with Anthos Service Mesh dashboards or the unified cluster dashboard inside of the Cloud Console. So expect to see that in the near future.
Cool. Awesome. All right, Jenn, let's keep plugging away here. Jenn is up. I'm going to throw your screen up here, Jenn. And great demo, Chris. You are now the resident Windows guy. Go get your tattoo.
Oh, no.
Lots of projects going in this case now. So, all right, Jenn, over to you. Take it away. Now we're going to dive into some of the service mesh stuff and talk a little bit about security, which we haven't done. And I would just add that some of the stuff Jenn's going to show you and some of the stuff we've done with Anthos Service Mesh in the past, now that we've moved some of these Windows and Linux workloads into GKE, we can benefit from service meshes without doing a lot of work. So another side effect. So over to you, Jenn. I'll give us a quick view of ourselves. So we're still here. We're still alive. And I think our special guest has arrived. So he's going to check out your demo and then we'll have a chat with him after. So over to you, Jenn.
So I have a few slides. I probably won't stay into them very much, but I just wanted to talk about using service mesh and some of the security things that you can do. You migrated a bunch of workloads or you have some other workloads on there and you want to make sure that those are as secure as you possibly can. So a quick about me, right? Hi, I'm Jenn. My focus at Arctiq is mostly around microservices, automation. I have all things config management. I'm pretty sure that's why Kyle said something. I will shamefully admit I'm not using config management in this particular case. This is very much just showing you some of the security components that you can use with Anthos Service Mesh and a bit of a difference between Anthos Service Mesh and Istio. And so Anthos Service Mesh is based on Istio, but there's a whole suite of other tools supported from Google, developed by Google that help with some of the observability and some of the security. And so, you can see the similar type ideas of things you would see in, say, Kiali in open source, but you can see that in the observability and the traceability portion of the Cloud Console. And I'll show you guys a bit of that because it's part of the demo. But it's really just, Service Mesh, but it's Istio with really fantastic googly things on top of it. And then, just in case, what does this actually look like, right? We've got some, an application and a service with a sidecar with some MTLS and a few other things and some security. Just figured everybody likes a diagram. And so the parts that I want to talk about and that I'm going to demo are the sort of encryption side. So, service-to-service encryption, and then also service-to-service authentication using mutual TLS. And then we're going to jump into a bit of peer authentication and peer authorization. And then I may, if we have some time left, I'll jump in and show a bit of that audit logging in Stackdriver. And so literally I have 3 slides. And so I'm going to show you guys the demo. And what I'm demoing
3
is...
slides, Jen. Impressive. Nice work.
I'm super lazy when it comes to slides. I rather show things off, so I don't talk through slides much. What I've got is I have this lovely little demo app that Google is making available, right? Google Inc. It's called Bank of Anthos. I got bored of doing the online boutique. So it's Bank of Anthos. What that is, you know, there's a user login service, there's a contact, there's a bunch of other things. And if I go, how did I lose my page? Here we go. You scroll down, there's a bit of an architecture diagram, which is super
Maybe
nice.
plus on that.
Yeah.
Just,
right. And it's still a fair amount of services, but you notice I've got a pair of DBs down here now, right? So the online boutique, you've got a bunch of other stuff, but I've actually got a pair of databases in here. So some of it's running Python, some of it is Java, right? This is all of your financial transactions. This is all of your user information. And when I looked at this, I decided the coolest thing to show you guys or show, you know, search security in this was to actually break it out. So when you look at the Git repository by default, it's sort of all one set of manifests deploys into the same namespace, all of those things. And I wanted to make that look a little bit different, a little bit more secure. So I broke that out, right? I broke out everything in that transaction side. So the right-hand side of the diagram that I showed you, I broke that out into a namespace. The left-hand side, I broke it out into a namespace, and then the front end. And I did that for a reason. That reason is I really want to restrict who can actually access this account, some of these databases, right? So the services that need that database are here, and the services that need the database are in the other namespace. And then the front end is just here, right? It's the front end, and that's over here. And what that looks like from this is the observability. So anybody who's used Istio and is used to looking at Kiali, I'm trying to blow this up a little bit more. You know, you get to see this. So you can see from an observability, you can see how many queries per second and where the services are going and doing all of those types of things. But it's all pretty flat right now. And I'm going to do really, really quickly is show you how flat this really is. And so one of the things that's nice about Anthos Service Mesh, and I'll keep talking while I'm pasting things in, is that by default, when you do an installation of Anthos Service Mesh onto a GKE cluster, you are going to get MTLS, so mutual TLS, that is peer authentication, enabled in permissive mode by default. And so right now, I'm just going to run a really quick Alpine shell, and I want to see if I can access that database. I'm sitting in the default namespace, so I'm not sitting in the namespace where maybe I should be. And I've logged in. So I'm sitting in the default namespace, I've dropped in a container, and I can connect to this database. It's probably not a fantastic idea. Let's see if I can, you know, list some tables. I can probably even get some information on users. I can. That's not great. Okay, so I am going to say, no, you have to be a part of the mesh. So if I get out of this, so in my default namespace, I'm not part of the service mesh, but if I do, you'll notice I have a sidecar. So the accounts namespace and the transactions namespace and the front end one all have Istio injection enabled. So they're all running that sidecar proxy. My Alpine container is not. I have mutual TLS turned on in permissive mode. And so I am going to, I have this set of YAML files in here. And if I cat one really, really quickly, all I'm saying is I want MPLS strict mode on these namespaces. So let's apply these. Now I'm going to jump back in to that Alpine pod. Okay, and I am going to, oddly, I should have built a Alpine container that already had my Postgres client on it, but thankfully this is pretty fast. I'm going to try and log in. Cool. I can't reach the database anymore. So I've turned peer authentication on, mutual TLS strict mode. and I can't reach the database anymore.
This is where we need the Giphy that said you've just been istioed.
Well, I mean, I say that, but what if, so I know mutual TLS is turned on. What if I label my namespace and I hop onto the service mesh? What happens then? Now, I'm probably going to have to delete this pod because it doesn't have a sidecar. You know, everything seems to take longer when you're waiting, right? I am going to drop the Postgres client on here again. And let's see if I can talk to the database again. Well, darn, I can, right? So what do? You don't want any of this stuff happening. So what I've got in this other directory, I've got, so if I cat this, made a little authorization policy that says, you know, you have to make your font too big and then you can't see anything. All right. I made an authorization policy that said the only things that I'm going to allow into this namespace are the front end, or sources, anything coming from the front end namespace on port 8080 into here. So it's going to be allowed to talk to the contacts app. And then if I scroll down further, it's going to be able to talk to the user services app, right? And that's it. And so let's apply that.
So this is probably the case where you could use ACM and Gatekeeper and stuff to push these policies out. Once everybody agrees that they're a good idea and you want to enforce them, we can leverage those toolkits in Anthos to be able to leverage all this. Absolutely.
These kind of policies are sort of namespace scoped. So if you had an Anthos config management repository, you would just drop these kind of files right into that namespace folder for the resources and let ACM apply them. I'm just wanting to test some of these things. So let's cool. First thing I'm going to apply is I'm going to apply a deny all. The way this gets ordered is if there's a deny, it processes it. If there's an allow, specific allow, that'll get processed, right? So it kind of goes through the list on the request and tries to process it appropriately. And I'm going to apply the allow. And so, okay, live editing on things. One sec.
Let's Cloud Shell to the rescue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that's cool too is you could certainly do this based on certain clusters. You could allow a user to be able to interact with the database in a lower environment, but then apply the policy to anything that's production. So you're not inhibiting people when they're experimenting, but putting policy in place for important environments.
I edited the wrong one. Okay. So I have applied a context policy and a user's policy. So now if I reattach, and we know that I called this Alpine Shell 2. Let me run this one really quickly. Sorry for that. Build one should be gone now. I'm on the mesh, so, right, I connected to the mesh. I've done all of those things. And there we go. So I've put in what we started off by just putting mutual TLS on. If you're not part of the mesh, you can't get access to it. But if you have somebody that have an application that suddenly does inject itself into the mesh with, labeling the namespace or something like that, you still want to do some restrictions, particularly in this case, because it's a banking application and some sensitive content information. And so by using some authorization policies and some peer authentication policies with allow and denies that are, in my case, they're namespace scoped, right, with a port, There's other ways to do this with HTTP methods and various other things that will allow you to restrict this even further. In my case, I'm saying anything that comes from the front end that's looking into connecting to the user service app on port 8080 is allowed. And thus, my database is no longer reachable from my default namespace or any other namespace other than itself. And that was my very, very quick little demo. There's a couple of things, right? So the really nice part about this is you can actually see some of this stuff in the dashboard. I'm going to finish up very, very quickly. I know we have a special guest coming. So you can see all of the different namespaces. One of the things that's a little bit disappointing at the moment is you'll notice both my accounts DB and my ledger DB do not show any sort of telemetry. And that's because TCP telemetry isn't being collected right now. I believe that's something that's being worked on, but any HTTP telemetry and services are being collected and you can watch them. You can set SLOs, you can do all sorts of other things. Like if I click on one, you can actually go in and see the traffic flows and whether it's encrypted, right? So, and there you go. There is my very, very quick run through security policies for Anthos Service Mesh with its banking app.
That's awesome, Jen. Thanks. I think so. We set off Bill Gates' pager for doing all these migrations of Windows to Linux. I think we just set off the entire Cisco ASA team's pager for. I think that demo is really powerful because I think as we teach, security in this new microservices way, a lot of people come into it expecting traditional network segments and firewalls and things like that. And, those days are kind of gone. We're using SDNs for this. And it is a good point. I mean, it's easy to set up the defaults and throw everything into a namespace, but you do still want to provide those security parameters and boundaries and do it through policy. So I think that's a perfect example of how you can kind of use Istio to build, network boundaries, only allow the things that need to talk to the other things to open and just reduce that footprint. So we do lots of whiteboard exercises with customers that we go from showing the traditional like layer to cake effect to firewalls and middleware. And then now we're kind of stretching it sideways and showing how this, so, getting these policies in are critical. And Istio is certainly a way to do it. I love the integration with the ASM dashboard. So you can, get some of that visibility. We always go pretty deep. We're on command line in these demos, but obviously there is tools to be able to make this a little easier. But the whole point of this is to show you what's kind of under the covers. So awesome demos, everybody. So it's time to bring in our special guest. So let's see if we can get him in here. There's Izzy. So I'll do like a 2-minute intro. I'll let you properly introduce yourself, Izzy. But Izzy was cool enough to come in to the live stream and our event today. He's coming in from Israel. So we'll see how the internet gods treat us. We're a long ways away from each other. But thanks for joining us, Izzy.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound fine.
So it works.
Yeah, it works. It sounds great.
All the way from Israel.
So Izzy's one of these guys that I would call a serial entrepreneur. He's started a few companies and had some successful exits. And one of the ones that I heard about before I got to meet him was when he started Velostrata, and then Google obviously got on to what you guys were up to, and it kind of invented some pretty cool technology. And as it came into Google, it was really of how do we move virtual machines off of traditional into cloud, more of that kind of lift and shift methodology. But then I was lucky enough to find out what you guys have been working on with this V to K, I think it was first told me. So virtual machine to Kubernetes, which I think is a real game changer. The team showed an example of moving some Linux workloads earlier and the Windows ones, which I think you caught. But yeah, how did this all come about? Izzy, obviously, I've met some of your team, and the engineering side is super impressive. I've got a history of working with some Israeli teams in the past with startup that I did, and I always love the culture and the engineering attitude of everything is possible. Let's just figure it out. So, can you give us a little history on how you started Velostrata, the idea, and then how'd you guys figure out this virtual machine to Kubernetes thing? This is a real game changer.
Yeah, so first of all, I just joined about half an hour. I still saw the tail end of the demo by, the Windows migration. I was excited to see it. It was really, really great. And I'm going to have all my team actually watch it when you have it on YouTube. Great to see, this being evangelized and, becoming reality for so many customers and partners alike. So it's great. So thanks a lot for that. So back to your question, Kyle. So, as you said, that this has actually been my third startup, and I always say that it's not my startup, it's our startup, right? Because we, to your point, right, we've been actually working together, a team of about 8 people for almost 20 years, going from one startup to an acquisition, then another startup, an acquisition, and then this is the third one. And acquisition, which I think, by the way, it's also always improving. I think Google has been the best so far in many ways, but I mean, that's part of the culture and the ability to execute. With after many years of working together, you get really this really, and I think you have this kind of culture yourself, right? I think in your organization, but really getting very, very deep understanding. I mean, the story I tell is like almost like the movie, Ocean 13 or whatever. We actually got together before Velostrata into a hotel room after I was, so me and Adi, my co-founder, who's like the senior product manager today for, Migrate, I was at VMware and he was at Microsoft, and we were talking, and really, talking to customers, to enterprise customers, and, talking and seeing that they are intrigued by we're talking 2014, right?
Yeah.
Intrigued by the concept of infrastructure on demand, and I don't have to go through the procurement, and how can it's so cool that there's shadow IT coming up, and people are seeing the value of the ability to act infrastructure, right away. It was the key trigger for them, and then the pay as you go and all things. So, but they were glued by the heavyweight legacy complex myriad interdependencies of our applications, the data gravity, the databases, the fear. What if it doesn't work at production workloads, right? I mean, what's about downtime? I can't do it, right? It's too much for me. Like this cloud is not possible. And what if I want to check multiple clouds? Everything was so confusing, and that's what we thought about initially. Let's first of all think about infrastructure modernization. This is 2014, not so much activity around, the V2K. We got time to it in a second. But then we figured out a way to say, okay, let's build based on our enterprise experience for many years in one optimization and virtualization. You mentioned that. I mean, so I had one startup that was acquired by Cisco and in the one optimization space, and another one in the industrial virtualization space acquired by VMware. So we had all those combined know-how in the team. And so we said, okay, let's combine everything we know. Let's solve that problem and bring a solution that essentially minimizes the downtime, allows them to roll back. Really, really important, because customers are really are worried about it, and also being able to do it at scale. Because if you're in the data center exit, right, you can't afford to have it like for so many years. And then also, can I test before I migrate, right? What can I do to ease that phase, right, the transition? And we came up with this idea called streaming technology that eventually became the foundation for the product. We also allow customers to burst before they migrate. If you just want to extend their data center, I'm sure you're familiar with that from previous startup, right, Kyle, that you've been engaged back then.
Yeah.
And so, long story short, we solved that problem, and we started to see some large enterprises using our solution, our technology, to move. The famous one was Cardinal Health, where we moved 5,000 servers. This is public information, right? But we first moved them into Amazon, and then at some point they decided to switch strategy and move to Google Cloud. And it came to us, hey, can you do something like Amazon to GCP? We're a startup. What would we say? Of course we can.
Yeah, of course you can. Give us 2 weeks, right?
Exactly. So we actually implemented that, and that also started to get the attention of Google later on. However, I forgot to mention the point about the Ocean 11, so I'll finish that story and get back to the V2K. So when we started to see this problem and solving it, I brought out my 6 people to one room in the hotel room in Tel Aviv, in Israel, and said, look, this is what we want to do. And we sat from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., and within 9 hours, they said, okay, we understand what to do. Go get the money, we'll get started. So you can only get that productivity after you've been working for 15 years and everyone understands what you do. But let's move on and go back to this. So So back in 2016-ish, 2017-ish, we started to see another trend coming up, which is, hey, it's nice to do infrastructure modernization, but, if I'm going to the cloud, I want to do something more than that, while I'm doing it. And can I modernize my application infrastructure, not just my infrastructure, not just infrastructure modernization, but application modernization. What can you help me there? Because, hey, I already started to roll out those Kubernetes clusters on-prem. It's great. But it's only a subset of my workloads, and I still have those 90% of workloads that I wish I could do something with them to modernize them. And by the way, the transition to the cloud, for all the other reasons, is a great catalyst to make that change. Because once I'm there, I want to leverage cloud-native technologies. I want to use the services. I want to take advantage of pay-as-you-go. So help me do that. So that the decision to go to the cloud has already triggered that second level of solution. And by the way, people started to see some sticker shock, right? And it's quite expensive to move workloads as is, right? If you're not careful, you actually might run into issues like you're running VMware, you have over-provisioned sprawl of VMs, like thousands of them. You pay for the host, you don't pay for the instance. Once you move to the cloud, you need to pay for the instance. Some of them are really underutilized, and I'm paying a lot. And like the sticker shock, like, what do I do? Yeah, it's right sizing, etc. But it started to be an issue. But more than that, I think people said, look, if I bring everything, all my VM management, my OS management, or my package management as is, and I move to the cloud, I didn't do really justice to what I can do with the cloud. Can I move to CI/CD pipelining? Can I move to a DevOps model, right? Can you help me there? And that's where we started to think about. And by the way, we also got this while partnering with Google. We got feedback from them as well. Hey, could you do something around containerization? Because we have a lot of customers asking for that. So that's how we got back. Well, it wasn't 2 weeks; it was a little bit more than that. We said, okay. We said, let's figure out, because there is a real genuine demand for that. What can we do in helping customers do that? Because we heard all those horror stories. Like there was a customer, financial services, that says, look, we don't move to the cloud before we modernize. However, they had I think 700 applications, and after 2 years and many people on the job, they managed to containerize about a few dozens. That is not a converging process. And the services framework that is associated with that, and all, it just becomes huge. Now, some of those workloads are third party, like the custom application on WebSphere, WebLogic, all these Java applications. What do I do? Can you help me there? And that's why we actually got into the idea of what can we do to help customers, kind of leapfrog and be able to move into, GKE or Kubernetes with, minimal, user intervention, so to speak. What can we do to do that? And that's how we started to think about, about so-called V2K. We actually had a live prototype or demo that we showed Google back then, end of 2017, and they freaked out. They said, well, how did you do that? And I said, okay. And it's hard to, I don't know if you know these guys, but it's hard to surprise them. Yep. The Google guys, all the, Tim Hawking and Brian Grant, and all these guys are doing Kubernetes forever. And really, when they saw it, said that's freaking cool. I mean, because what happens is that, Google is really doing well, with all the, cloud native companies, right? And we know that. I mean, it's a great platform, and GKE is doing awesome there. But, can we get more? And it's from both directions. And the customer is saying, can we get our workloads and benefit from the control plane, from the ability to do, self-healing and dynamic scaling and all this, the creative specifications, be able to do, all the things that you guys are doing so well for my existing workloads. Now, so what we did really, Kyle, is essentially said, again, we are enterprise guys and we are focused on legacy workloads. So it's not, and we know all those implications. So it says, okay, first of all, let's make sure that we can migrate them with the stateful, right? With the database, with the state that they have, because most of them are stateful applications. And luckily, by the time we started working, there was also stateful sets and stateful containers that we're able to do. But then again, you go to VMs, there's VM decays, there are a lot of volumes, a lot of, distant, block level, and you need to transition them into, file level, aggregated, persistent volume. So we said, let's make sure that the storage is migrated transparently and converted to a persistent volume. By the way, we use, even today, all the goodies of the streaming technology under the covers when we migrate all the state, because we want to make sure that you migrate everything. Then we talked about, how do we, basically strip the operating system, right? I mean, because we want to try this. And so how do we decouple the elements that should not be migrated? And we came up with this cool idea of, essentially stripping the kernel and then basically moving it, but still keeping the services framework that applications need in order to be able to continue to work, right? Cron jobs and everything that comes with so-called systemd. So we needed to take that user mode part and move it along to preserve the portability of the application, being able to run as they used to, but now in a container environment. So we created this idea of nested containerization that basically conceals and does all the needed aspects of actually making them run, permissions management, and everything in a kind of very transparent way. So that was pretty cool. And then we're able to create those containers, those VMs, actually create containers, and using the density and bin packing, we can also now all of a sudden actually create cost reductions, significant cost reductions. We see some customers 60% reduction because now they can run them and leverage Kubernetes on method, to make sure that the density is in place. But it wasn't enough. So that was like, we call it phase one. We move them in there, and then you can like what Jenn did, or we can also plug in a sidecar container and have Istio or SCM in place, which is great. You can get the logging and monitoring using Stackdriver, all this being integrated under the covers. However, customers came to us and says, hey, you know what, that's great, but how do I do day two operations? What happens after I've moved it? Can I continue? Can I build CI/CD pipelines? Can I actually leverage the true power of Kubernetes in order to be able to deliver continuous integration, continuous delivery, image management? We had a customer, financials, I cannot say his name, but they said, look, we spend $500 million on patch management every year, okay? And on OS patches and on remediation and big fix and all that stuff. We hate that, right? So once we move to the cloud, we want to move into CI/CD. We want to move into image-based management. So we have a golden image and a layered image, and once we test it in the lab, we know it's going to work everywhere, right? And get rid of all this kind of remediation stuff. $500 million. So by moving into this model, right? And so what we did for that purpose, Kyle, we actually did like what we call a second phase of the technology, which said, look, let's split the image, create a stateless image out of it, split it from the configuration data, and make sure that we create the artifacts. Whether it's the image, the Docker image, the Docker file, all the deployment YAMLs, and I think you probably saw some of them in the demo. And then using those artifacts, we can not only migrate the stateful workloads and convert the storage and do the networking and runtime, but we also give all the necessary ingredients for customers to continue and manage those things in day two. So that was the big aha moment for a lot of customers that realized, and I think also you guys have helped us a lot as design partners in guiding us on what is needed. So really appreciate it, by the way. And that's how we came about so-called 1.3 version that now allows you to do both. That's kind of the evolution of the journey. Hopefully that's a long answer to a short question, but hopefully.
I love it. I love the history lesson, and a couple things I learned there is when you hear people tell you it's hard or not doable, but there's a real business problem behind it. You lock a bunch of close, smart friends in a room and tell them they can't leave and have lunch until we come up with an MVP plan. But it just goes to show that entrepreneurial attitude with you and your team is like, you smell opportunity by hearing pain points from customers, right? Like the hardest part of doing something unique in a startup and solving a problem is the idea and what is the actual thing we're solving. you can come up with great ideas. But if it's not a real pain point that someone's suffering, that someone's going to spend money on, probably isn't worth doing. So I think that's part of the art that you guys have figured out.
Yeah, I think that's basically, three things, right, that you point out. One is really understanding real pain, and this pain, it cannot be just a minor pain. It has to be, because as you're a startup, if you want to get attention, it has to be like, I always say, it has to be one of the 3 top priorities for IT in the next 2 years, because otherwise you're not going to be counted, right? Then you have to come with something that is markedly differentiated, right? You cannot come with the Me Too with 20% improvement. No one is going to care about you as a startup. It has to be like, wow, I haven't seen something like that. Well, that I haven't seen, and it addresses one of my top priorities. And the third thing is really, to your point, it's still, they say there is nothing possible, but there is. I mean, so you have to make sure that you can really deliver something good enough, an MVP in a reasonable amount of time, and show progress. I'm a great believer in delivering piecewise, right? Not just like 2 years and wait. Just get something very simple that works and provides enough value, get the feedback and iterate it like as soon as possible, and maybe switch. And I in all of my startups, all 3, I had a pivot, a major pivot, right? And so it's just so hard to hit in the first time. You think you know it, you get some feedback, and until you see some really wide adoption, you never know. And so that's kind of the thinking around, how do you do a start? By the way, if someone wants to get some more from my advice, I do twice a week for 1 hour. I do mentorship for young entrepreneurs. Lots of it, mostly in Israel because of the time zone, but I'm happy to engage. It's like, this is pro bono. Happy to help and give advice.
Wow, that's a nice offer, man. I love we need more entrepreneurs that are willing to go out and invent something, right? Like we're getting to the point where we have these hyperscalers that are solving a lot of problems, but you have to kind of look beneath that. Like even Arctiq, we solve a problem we deal with the customer, we deal with the real problems. Google builds amazing software, and then us getting to work with the engineering teams and be able to give them feedback makes better products. So I think there's always opportunity. You just have to find it, and you have to be willing to put the work in and go after it and solve the problem.
And I want to comment on what you said about Arctiq and specifically, and the role of partners like quality partners like you in general is, especially when you deal with digital transformation, right? And you go to these enterprises. Again, when you go to the cloud native, they know how to do it, right? They started like cloud native, but when you go to the enterprises that are more sort of legacy, or then they need a lot of help. I mean, they need the help in consulting and understanding the problem and getting some advice, and then eventually, getting them onboarded on these new technologies. And this is where I think, and I truly believe in it, I think that partners, quality partners like Arctiq, but also others, are so critical for these guys, right? Because they're the glue that basically make things happen. The in between, as I mentioned, like, how do I do things happen? Now, we provide the technology and the tooling, but it's not nearly enough. I'll give you an example. Many customers come to us today and say, hey, you know what? It's a great idea, but can you help me figure out what should go into B2K or versus not? So we have some guidelines, but it's obviously the devil's in the details. You need someone who really understands in depth, right? Whether this J2E application, can run it. Does it have a kernel module? Does it have some elements? We see sometimes workloads that have mixed deployments. Some persistency layer cannot move to containers. Some the web front is perfectly stateless going to container. But we can provide a solution that essentially gives you this mixed deployment, right? So, but all these things require a strong, partner that knows how to do these things, right? So we really, by the way, appreciate Arctiq being one of the top partners for Anthos, and for a good reason, because we need people that can really take those customers into this new territory now. And multi-cloud has just another layer of complexity, and then on-prem and all the intricacies there. So there's a lot of place to do, and I don't think the vast majority of our customers that we are working with in this kind of migrate to Anthos, we always tell them, just go find a good partner. There's always some customers that will try to do it on their own, but by and large, it's, not very successful. It takes so long also. Yeah. So.
Yeah, cool. And I mean, I think for us, when I look at our history with Anthos, we got started when it was just the GKE on-prem idea. Like we were sitting around with a team, very small team, saying, "Hey, we're thinking of bringing this to market. Do you want to kind of be a design partner?" And kind of like what you said earlier, when you get an opportunity like that, the answer is always yes. And then when you figure out what that means after, it's like, what's a design partner mean? And what it meant was just be collaborative. It really matched to all of our kind of like core kind of mottos at Arctiq. And we got access to the team building stuff. And the thing I really loved was they loved feedback, good or bad. And your team's been really good like that as well. Is, what do you think means, what do you really think? Like we're making a bet here. Like if you don't like it, we want to hear about it. We want to hear why. We want to hear how to make things better. And then the end result of that is we get to go implement something that we had a hand in kind of saying. We might not have built it. We might have just built some glue around it. But we had a hand in how do we get this in front of customers? How do we solve real kind of impactful challenges? And what I'm really seeing with Migrate for Anthos is, Anthos has grown up to be an entire product set now. What I always talk about is Kubernetes is kind of table stakes at this point. You don't differentiate yourself there. You differentiate yourself up the stack. So, in these Backstage Passes, we've done Anthos config management, service mesh. We've talked about like binary auth. We've talked about Cloud Run. And then now we've deployed this to a ton of enterprise customers. And the reality is the business case comes and says, okay, we invested, we got this stuff built. Sure, I get the whole cloud native pipeline. We can build everything from scratch and put it into like CI/CD and take this Kubernetes approach. But the reality is that takes time, and we're not building greenfield apps every day. We got this brownfield we got to deal with, and the conversations we're having around Migrate for Anthos now are super real because people are saying, okay, time to fulfill the business case. Help us move these apps in. Let's figure out the ones that are going to move and just stay. Let's figure out the ones we're going to move, and then we're going to kind of modernize as we go. Some people are saying, I need to get out of this data center. This is my simple case. Like, get me to cloud, and I can't redevelop everything. So I really do see it as like the icing on top. There's lots more stuff coming in Anthos, but having toolkits that allow us to migrate apps in quick order and build this application factory that we can nail the use cases and then help customers realize the opportunity is super critical. So I love being able to talk about this stuff now, especially with the changes you guys have made in 1.3, and everything is so much more portable. We continue, you saw Chris jumping in and running PowerShell on these and pushing. Mohsin built a new Docker file on the fly and redeployed it. So it's really cool. I guess last question before we jump off is, what are you hearing from, I know you talk to a lot of customers and a lot of executives, and you described the way you built this company was off, hey, what's your problem statement, and we'll help to solve it. What do you think's next? I mean, we're getting Kubernetes is kind of a word that everybody knows and understands now. What's the next big challenge we need to solve, or for these guys over the next year or two?
Yeah. Good question. We have some thoughts, and I can share with them. But I do want to maybe just comment a little bit on what you just said about I think the need to really cater for those customers in a way that gives them, a continuum of capabilities, and it may relate to your question as well, which means that, we need to make sure the customers have a way to, some customers want to migrate first because they evacuate the data center. We have a customer that we talked to last week, 20,000 servers. Wow. And they have a mandate now to, evacuate 6 data centers out of 28 by the end of the year, right? And COVID, by the way, is a big catalyst for some of those decisions, as you may imagine. Yeah. But then they have no time. So for those, they need to kind of rush and kind of migrate. But they say, look, we got to have a strategy for modernizing later, because this is just, and how can you help us? And that's where differentiators like Anthos come into play. But we want to make sure, hey, some customers do migrate first, modernize later. Some others want to modernize first, and we support that today, going on-prem. And then you can, and some of them are mix and match. So I think that's really important to make sure that we address all the customer needs. Yep. Now, to your question, one of the things that we're seeing now, right, is going even further, right? I mean, how can you help me? So this is one trend we're seeing. Like, there's some other solutions in this place. Like, can you help me actually unify everything they do, right, under like a control plane, right? So let's think about Kubernetes for VMs, right? Not just for containers. So we're seeing, like, because, with all due respect, we're trying, but there will be some workloads that I'm not ready even to containerize today, right? And how can I have one way, consistent way of managing my workloads, whether containerized or VMs, right? So that's one element that we keep hearing, right? And again, the benefits of Kubernetes, the declarative control plane, span beyond that. Or can we use things like managed instance groups, which is a VM-based construct for doing something that allows you to do, again, dynamic scaling, self-healing, right? Or things like that. How can we apply more of the declarative specification interfaces to more and more GCP services, more and more VMs, et cetera? I think that's one thing we're starting to see as a trend. Obviously, and I don't have to mention that because it's already kind of happening, but more and more, and that's where Anthos is all about, but they all want to be multi-cloud, right? They don't want to, and it's becoming more and more. I think that now 70 or 80% of the big 5,000 enterprises, which is our focus, right, are about multi-cloud, and creating a consistent way of doing this is critical, and that's where Anthos obviously addresses some of it, but it's still kind of, emerging. And of course, there's more and more, programming models that, we all know about. It's still kind of emerging slowly. Obviously, serverless and things like that will probably, come, more into it. But, that's kind of where we're seeing. I think it's, it's more about, and by the way, just demo that I show here, like Windows is yet another thing. Can we bring Windows into this world?
Yep.
One of the things that customer tells us about Windows is, hey, if I can just save the license cost, right, of Windows, right, not just the patches and the kernel stuff, but, just have, that's a very clear ROI right there. But, we see huge demand for Windows containers. It's when we actually, as an Anthos team, we did not actually anticipate such a big demand for that, which means that there is a really strong interest in moving into this, declarative specifications, et cetera. So we see that happening there. There's a few probably, but I think maybe what I said earlier, right? I think that unifying the orchestration and management across all your workloads, or services, I think that's one big trend that we'll see for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, one of the first comments in the chat when we started this was someone said, when did Migrate for Anthos start supporting Windows? Good to know. So I think it's up to us to get the word out on this stuff. And
I would say that to our defense, this is just was a preview. So we're actually adding, and as you said, we're adding CRD support. We're adding actually Cloud Console support. Actually, the Cloud Console support is coming right, very, very soon. For those, and there's actually a bunch of extensions, but Windows was still in preview mode and it was still kind of private access. So very soon, in another number of weeks, it'll be much more available. So we'll be happy to engage with customers and on getting you onboarded on Windows is actually pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're very fortunate to get early access to be able to kick the tires and show this off to the community and stuff like that. So I want to thank you for coming on. That was I love the history lesson and how you described how you put this 4-year kind of journey and then got into the Google game. And then, I've only seen you guys turn the gas on since then. So it's super fun to work with your team. And is there super impactful use cases for our customers? So we love bringing this stuff to the table. So thanks for joining. Thanks, everyone, for joining the latest and greatest. I think we may take an extra week on the next one. I think last week I said the next one was Anthos and Friends, but the next one is Anthos and Friends. And we're going to show off a lot of integrations with some of our ecosystem partners in Anthos and how they complement the entire stack. And we look forward to having more conversations about Migrate for Anthos. I'm sure a lot of the stuff you saw today you didn't know was possible. So ring us up and we'll set up a deep dive call with Arctiq, and we'll get Izzy's team there too, telling the stories and describing the tech and keep pushing the envelope with this stuff. So
yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. We will get the replay up soon, and you can share it with your friends, and we'll tag all the demos in the chat so you can skip to some of the ones you're interested in. And I know it's getting a little late there, Izzy, so thanks for joining late, and enjoy your day tomorrow. Thanks a lot for the demos team. I know Mohsin had to drop for a customer deliverable, but loved the demos, and the good part is I hadn't seen most of those, so I got to learn something today. So, all right, everybody, take care. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thanks, Izzy. Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks.